Hey BK with Ofer Cohen.
Here's a guy that does not live in Brooklyn, but yet reinvented what living in Brooklyn means and built so many apartments.
Right.
Tell me about that sort of experience.
So actually, I should feel bad that I don't live in Brooklyn right now.
No, I'm not trying to make you feel
No,
guilty.
I know.
I'm Ofer Cohen. On this episode of Hey BK, I talked to Eran Chen, an Israeli-born architect and founder of ODA Architecture. Based in Manhattan, Eran is currently working on developments around the city and abroad, but it's in Brooklyn where his career really took off. From several projects on the 4th Avenue corridor, through the innovative urban design of the old Rheingold Brewery site, and all the way to Elliot Spitzer's project on the Williamsburg waterfront.
You know, it's been quite fascinating because Brooklyn, in so many ways, is different than Manhattan, and I know that people compare all the time. In a way, even try to kind of copy the successes from Manhattan into Brooklyn, but that's something that we shouldn't do, because Brooklyn has its kind of character of its own, and it has so many more opportunities that Manhattan doesn't have anymore. Sort of the urban texture is already kind of done.
Right.
And if you take exceptions, Hudson Yard is different, or the High Line, that really was surprising in their scale and the way that they changed the city. Otherwise, we're just building buildings within an existing context. Where in Brooklyn, there's areas of really new invention and great developments, and you have the ability to really try to adapt architecture to people's life and to what people want to and how people want to live today. So that's exciting.
And really develop more of a neighborhood than working within a confined lot.
Right. I mean, one of the things that always bothered me living in New York City is the lack of intimacy and neighborhood-like feeling. It used to be in many neighborhoods. I think that where I am on the Upper West Side, there's still a sense of it, and places like Tribeca and other places. But as density grows, you lose that sense of community ownership. And how do you create it when you have a building and a street, and the relationship is either you're inside the building or outside the street? It's very tough. You have to make sure that either the streets themselves become the place of community, like we grew up, and that the buildings, the way that they're built, create a sense of belonging and an area that kind of belongs to everyone. And it's not just having sort of a series of amenities, if you will, but having a territory outside of the building and inside of the building that is communal. And that's a tough challenge, but I think it's exciting.
Eran moved to New York in 1999. He studied architecture at the elite art school Bezalel in Jerusalem, where he was exposed to new ideas and culture for the first time.
I grew up in a small town in Israel, in Beersheba. When you grow in smaller towns, regardless of your talent or capabilities, your dreams are smaller than people that live in bigger towns. It's funny. Partially because you don't know what are the possibilities that are out there. My dreams were modest, even when I came to New York. I just dreamed of landing a job in a big office and being able to go down and have lunch and eat hot dog at the park. That was really the extent of my dream. I didn't think that it's going to grow beyond that, to be honest. And then, it was hard to land a job. I would say, even I'm ashamed to say, is ignorance as an Israeli coming into town. I was not prepared. I didn't write my resume the right way. I sent my work experience from Israel with a resume that people didn't know how to read. And
this is such a typical Israeli story.
Typical Israeli.
Yes. Very familiar.
And I remember, it's funny, I remember that after being denied from so many offices, I was so depressed. And I went to one of my friends, who was an investment banker who's been in the city for quite some time. And I said, look, you got to help me here. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I thought of myself as decent architect. Nobody wants to take me. And he said, okay, let's see what you're sending out. And he looked at my resume and he says, no. This is America, my friend. You can't have a typo in a resume. So that was my first kind of lesson. So he tied up my resume, and I applied for a few more jobs. And it's the funniest story because I was so desperate. At some point, somebody called me back from New Jersey. And he said, okay, can you come for an interview? I said, sure, fine. But I didn't realize at that time how big New Jersey is. And I just said, I'm going to take a cab.
You
So I
just
took a
started to
cab.
cross
I
the
took a
river.
cab from the Upper West Side to a place that is an hour and a half into Jersey. I can't even remember the name of the town. Got me broke. I couldn't even pay the taxi bill. But anyways, I get off the cab and I go into the small office, maybe 10 people. And the guy looks at my work and he says, wow, I mean, I think you're really good. How much money do you want to make? And I said, I don't know, maybe $50,000 a year. And he looked at me and he says, well, we're not paying that kind of money here. But he said, I have a very good friend that I went to school with. His name is Brad Perkins. He have a very, very big company in New York City. Let me call him.
That's how Eran landed his big break at Perkins Eastman. But by 2007, he felt antsy.
We had our second child and lived in a rental one-bedroom apartment, walk up on the Upper West Side, having to carry the stroller up and down every day, etc. And we thought that was fine. Everything was fantastic. And I remember this weekend I sat with my wife and I said, look, I'm contemplating this idea of opening my own office. What do you think? And she's like, that's fantastic. If you want, go for it. But my wife is a scientist. She worked at Mount Sinai, making $40,000 a year. We had 2 kids. And we said, how the hell we're going to do that? There's no way that I can take that risk. And we very quickly decided that it's not going to happen. And then a week after, I'm reading the New York Times, and the New York Times Magazine had a cover story about David Ajaya. He's quite famous now. But the story kind of tells his how he opened his firm in London. And there's something about this story that totally kind of triggered my, my hidden desire. And I told my wife, that's it, I'm doing it. And that was it.
Eran founded ODA just before the economy collapsed. Developer Itzhak Tesler gave the firm a chance, converting the toy building on Madison Square Park.
He said, well, would you do it for half the fee? And I said, of course. And
Earmuffs, all the developers, earmuffs.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about money, right? And he said, so when can you start? And I said, Itzhak, I don't even have a name for the company. And frankly, I don't have money yet set aside. I know that I'm going to buy a few computers and stuff. And he said, well, look, we need to start in 2 weeks. And I said, how are we going to do it? And I don't know if you know Itzhak, he used to smoke a cigar in his office. It was like, he's a big guy. And I'm sitting there and he says, look, we got to do it. How much money do you need? And I said, I think, maybe $150,000 to start. So like in the movies, he kind of opened the drawer, took out a checkbook, like these big ones, and he said, $150,000. Who do I write the check to? Because the company didn't exist. I said, just write it on.
That's a good story.
I'm grateful for this for forever, and I love Itzhak for that. And he really trusted me. And in 2 weeks, we bought the equipment. We started working, at the office, and that was our biggest project.
What was your experience of just being a small new office in the middle of a very big recession?
It was terrible. It was really bad. I mean, honestly, when I look back, I almost tapped myself on the shoulder that I sustained it because it was so bad. We lost the one big project that we had. We had to come up with ideas. So we thought of everything from giving interior design courses for housewives to open a bagel shop at the street. I mean, it was so desperate. We had no source of income whatsoever. We had commitment on a lease that we couldn't pay, and I had to pay salaries to people. And thank God I've made some money in that whatever year and a half before, and I spent it all by paying back my employees. But then a miracle happened, and a friend of a friend connected us to this guy who was an executive in Blackstone and a billionaire who just bought his penthouse on the Trump Tower. And he thought it's the perfect time to do a renovation of a penthouse because the market was crashed. And he knew that everybody's desperate, so he conducted a competition between international architects around the world, including Richard Meyer, to design his penthouse. And I did my research. He's also an American success story, originally from Vietnam. He was sort of a refugee of war, And my entire design philosophy on this apartment was based on that. And he totally fell in love. It was just love at first sight.
Nice.
And we got the project. Now, that was a lifesaver because just in broad terms, he knew that he's going to spend about $20 to $30 million on this apartment. So I spent the years of the recession flying around the world in a private jet, looking for marble and artwork. And the stories are so insane and excessive that it was just mind-boggling. We ended up spending, $2.5 million on a staircase. So it was so extreme from where I was that it's just only in America that could happen. We flew his private jet to yachts around the world and spent, weeks in the Bahamas. It was just...
That's a really good recession story. So as I'm listening to you, what strikes me is like, architects usually have a big plan and a path and a vision. And it sounds to me, and I don't know how much of it is real, is that you actually, you very innocently kind of fall into things, and you had at least the few instances you just described, a lot of good luck, or maybe people are just attracted to your humility.
I don't know that it's true that things just come to me, but that I seize the opportunities in a very nimble way. The impact of architecture today on our well-being is absolutely, I believe, critical. And so acting within that complexity, you can either be the sort of the macho architect that says, it's my way or the highway, and I've got a vision of how we're going to, change your life. Or you say, it's very important to me in baby steps to improve what we do. And in that sense, I think I always see the opportunity in every possibility, because I think there's always a better way to do things. I was willing to do anything that has to do with design if I can make a small difference. People mock me because we didn't talk about this, but my first job as an architect, I was a student in Israel, was to design McDonald's restaurants in Tel Aviv. You didn't know that, right?
That's amazing.
My friend said, "Are you nuts? I mean, we as architects do not go and design McDonald's restaurants." And I said, "Why not? What's wrong with that? You can make a better restaurant. Maybe the experience of the people could be better. Maybe the way that it opens up to the street is better." And I know, and that's sort of my set of mind. And part of how I feel about my profession, which might seem humble, but I think it's just more, it's not coming out of being humble. It's coming out of looking passionately at architecture as an opportunity to improve people's life.
Eran's path mirrors that of some of the developers he's worked with in Brooklyn.
If you're a mid-sized developer or a small developer, you need to find a different edge. You have to be more creative. And so by starting projects in Brooklyn, because the mid-sized and lower or smaller developers, were active here, we've been able to bring creativity that brought success stories to those developers. And then some of the bigger guys looked back and said, "Hey, that's interesting. Why can't we try to do it here?" It's funny when I speak to Europeans, because now we spend a lot of time in Europe. They speak about Brooklyn more than they speak about Manhattan.
Right.
It's something about the young, sort of percolating, exploding culture that Brooklyn projects outside to the world. And I think it's an overlap of art and, sort of the free spirit of the young entrepreneurs, the idea that there's more offices and mixed-use projects in Brooklyn. People kind of see their lives today, their mix of personal and professional life in a different way that we saw it 15, 20 years ago. And around the world, everybody's looking at similar problems, similar challenges. And it seems like Brooklyn has been developed these ideas because it can.
The rental development of the 10-block mega project at the former Rheingold Brewery in Bushwick has tested Eran's creativity.
So there was literally a war where the neighborhood felt this is terrible. And I said, there's no way I can be successful doing
Right.
what I do as an architect, bringing a huge building into this neighborhood that everybody is going to just hate and resent. And I said, there's something wrong with that picture. So I felt the urge to be more involved, and that's where I came up with the idea of O.P.E.N, which is ODA Public Engagement in Neighborhood. It's a non-for-profit organization that aims to basically connect better existing communities where we operate as architects to the act of change, to the new buildings that are being developed, and find a ways to tie, because there's so many benefits in those new projects to them, find a way to tie those existing community to what we do. And the best way to do it, I find, is through art. And so we raised out about $400,000, and we used that money to collaborate with local artists in Bushwick and kids and other non-for-profits to do 8 mega murals in and around the buildings, and then 8 sculptures in the public park. So at the end of it, you had, 150 kids
That's amazing.
that were part of the creation of the art within the project, would make them attached personally to it. And now they can walk in the neighborhood and point out, says, I did this, I thought about it. So that's extremely exciting. Beyond the fact that it's just incredible from a vision standpoint, it's like a museum, a mega museum of street art in the neighborhood that kind of invented in Brooklyn the street art. It just feels like I'm a contributor. Although I don't live in Brooklyn, for example, I feel like I belong to these neighborhoods. I feel so connected now to Bushwick. What we need to push for in Brooklyn more and more is to put pressure on city planning to change the zoning and their attitude towards mixed-use projects. I mean, people say that, but in practicality, I don't see enough of that coming from our administration. What I mean by that is we need to be able, in many more neighborhoods, to be able to build both office, residential, and light industries, including cultural projects and school projects altogether. That would relieve the pressure of being reliant on Manhattan for work, and that would bring more communities together because they can live and work at the same location.
I mean, you talked about some proud moments and some sort of monumental moments in your career, but what are kind of like some of the achievements that you're most proud of? When you look at everything you've done in Brooklyn in such a relatively short period of time.
You know, I think that the corridor of 4th Avenue, for example, not too far from here, when we've started our first project there, it was a very iffy, neighborhood. And I think having designing 2 buildings on 4th Avenue and now designing 2 more, we can bring a critical mass of developments that are attractive enough that would establish that corridor as almost like the Park Avenue of Brooklyn. And I'm very proud also on our new building on Kent Avenue because there's something else that always kind of felt a bit shortcoming. The developments that are happening along the East River. There's a lot of them, and I feel that there's a lot of sort of generic developments. They're seen everywhere from Manhattan and from Brooklyn, and yet they didn't seize the opportunity to celebrate that the location that they're at, so being so prominent. With Elliott, we've been able to create a building that not only caters, I think, in a totally different ways to people who wants to live in a high-rise building on a waterfront, but also makes sort of an architectural statement that says, hey, we need to think differently. Like it or not, it's different. Design sells. Why? Because even in, not only at the high end, in the mid end, and even in the lower end, it's a generation that is thinking design. This is not the time in New York where you build it and they'll come just because people have no choice. You have to touch their heart, not only their pockets, and demonstrate in your building there's something that you've done that would improve their life.
Right.
And once you do that, you're going to get a return for your money.
Right. That's a great sales pitch. Eran Chen, Thanks so much for coming to our studio.
Thanks for
Only
having
in
me.
Brooklyn, two Israeli guys speaking to each other for an hour in English.
How funny is that, huh?
It's really cool.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you for having me. It's been such a journey, I think, for both of us in so many ways that is parallel.
Yeah.
And it's great to spend time with somebody like you. So thank you.
You're listening to Hey BK, the podcast about the people behind Brooklyn's transformation. You can find us at heybk.nyc or wherever you get your podcast. Please download and subscribe to all our episodes. I'm Ofer Cohen. Thanks for listening.